Resnick and I, Knowledge in Class, a Marxian Critique of Political Economy. It was produced in the late 1980s, published at that time by the University of Chicago Press. The editorial board of that press that made the decision to publish this work in Marxian economics had on it one Milton Friedman. Some of you might enjoy that. It was amazing to us that they decided to publish this book. It is still in print. It is being used around the world in various courses, so it's available. And if you're interested, you should be able to get that anywhere through Amazon or any other book. So, some people ask me what you should get if you're going to buy something for this. If you do not have the works of Karl Marx, you should have them. Even if you don't read them, it looks good on the shelf. They're available in reasonably inexpensive paperbacks. I would urge you to get it. You may, if you've never read it, you may be surprised. Some of it is dense and hard-going, but Marx was a very literary fellow and liked to write, and if you get into his spirit, he's full of humor and ironic asides. It's a much more interesting reading than 99.9% of people in the profession of economics, whose quality of writing is unspeakable. People who've ever been a graduate student or an undergraduate been assigned articles in economics. Your suffering, at least you should know, was not alone. It's a suffering shared by everybody in the profession. Nothing is ever done in our profession to teach anyone how to write. And nothing in our profession is ever done teaching anyone how to teach. I was a professor all my life. I'm still a professor. I was never required anywhere in the American university system to even take a half-hour seminar in how to teach. It is simply the presumption of American higher education that if you sit on your rear end long enough in one subject, by some osmotic magic, you will learn how to teach. All of you that have gone to college realize what an absurd assumption that is, because you've sat through all those people who could not teach their way out of a paper bag. So writing and teaching are not skills that are required, and our higher education establishment shows that. Okay, any questions then about the logistics, details, or anything else? Anything that has to do with registration, fees, take that up, please, with the people who run the Brexit Forum. I don't know anything about it and have no responsibility for it. Last thing. This course is also presented with an eye towards your being able, even though that's a tall order, I know, to apply some of the things we're going to be going through to the current economic crisis. Marx's work was stimulated at all times in his development by crises of capitalism. In a sense, he came to his political and theoretical maturity through a sequence of crises. The Communist Manifesto, the document that he wrote that is most widely known, was written in the middle of a big global European capitalist crisis, 1848. He wrote subsequently through a whole sequence of business cycles and crises. That was a major concern, so he always had it in his mind, so everything he's written is in a sense applicable to these kinds of crises. And for those of you that haven't noticed it, crisis and capitalism are twins. You do not have capitalism without crisis. Capitalism is an unstable system, boom and bust, rise and fall, recession, inflation. There are dozens of words to describe the same phenomenon, a bouncy up and down quality to this system. It has been that way from the beginning, at least 300 years that we know of capitalism's history in Europe and beyond. Every conceivable effort has been made by the people responsible for capitalist economies, usually governments, but also large businesses. Every effort you can imagine has been made to either contain, but even more desirably, eradicate this instability. It is upsetting, it drives large numbers of people out of businesses out of business, it unemploys large numbers of people, and it brings capitalism criticism, hostility, and the risk of overthrow. For all those reasons, it has always been desirable to get rid of these cyclical returning crises. every package of measures ever taken by any leader to cope with the crisis at the time he or she was a leader. At that time, every leader promised that the package of reforms and regulations, and let me quote for you the latest one, Barack Obama, if you just reform the financial sector, if you just pass my stimulus, if you just extend the toxic assets relief program, then not only will we get out of the crisis, but we will prevent future crises. Every leader who's ever intervened to deal with it has made that promise. And every leader has been unable to fulfill that promise. The ability to avoid crises in the future didn't work. Clue, we're in one now. So all the previous promises came to nothing. Capitalism and cyclical instability and crisis are twins. You can't get rid of the one, punchline, without getting rid of the other. Since getting rid of the other, capitalism, is not available, what we have is an endless series of efforts to contain and limit and control crisis without getting rid of capitalism, and hence the result, we didn't get rid of the crisis either. It's not a thinkable thought in Western culture to see the connection. But of Marx is always in his mind. One of the goals of producing this theory was his own reaction to crisis and the damage that it caused. Okay. In terms of the outline, our tasks for today are topics 1 and 2. A couple of you pointed out that if there are 4 weeks, and I have 5 units on the outline, there's some disjuncture here. I want to relax you. Very good, you paid attention to the numbers. We're going to do 1 and 2 the first class, and then everything will be organized. Number 1 is an introduction to get us all comfortable with the basics of Marxian theory that we're going to assume. Okay, so let's turn then to a kind of overview of the basics, particularly those contained in Volume 1 of Capital. And a footnote, even though I don't want to be detained by it. Marx is a very prolific writer. You ever looked at his collected works? It's in the dozens and dozens of volumes. He wrote a lot. He found it easy. But if you want the core of his economic theory, then you really have to go to this particular book. There are other books that are useful and have interesting things about economics, for sure. But this is it. If you want to understand Marx's economics, you kind of have to wade through volumes 1, 2, and 3. Volume 1 was literally written by Marx. Volumes 2 and 3 were not. Marx died before he could finish it, so volumes 2 and 3 were actually produced by his colleagues, particularly Friedrich Engels and their joint colleague, junior colleague, a German Marxist named Karl Kautsky. They put together, in later years, volumes 2 and 3, and those are more in the nature of Marx's notebooks, collected and edited, but they don't have the complete roundedness, they don't have the literary flair that volume 1 does, and that Marx himself gave. Marx had a classical education in Europe of the sort that is no longer there or faded, but it involved heavy dose of Greek, heavy dose of Latin as part of your education. And so if you read Capital, it's full of quotations from Greek writers and Roman writers. That was the way Europeans were trained, and Marx was part of that educational process. But it gave him a wealth of references, very different from what you read in economics now. Nowadays, most professional economics people have been majoring in economics since they were sophomores in college. That's really all they know. And so their ability to bring in references from other topics is either non-existent or very haphazard. It's not like that anymore. Marx is a historian, a sociologist, a literary critic, and that's not unique to Marx. That was the tradition of European education. Okay, so let's turn then to the basics of Marx's economic theory. What Marx was after was to offer an economic theory different from what was existing in his time. It is extremely important that you not try to understand Marx as another theorist in some long line. You know, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, Karl Marx, that kind of thing. What that does is put him in a collection of people that his whole work was designed to separate him from. He's a critic. Adam Smith thought capitalism was wonderful. David Ricardo was a practitioner of capitalism in the City of London Financial Centre, and very successful and very rich as a result of it. John Stuart Mill came from an old British family, etc. They were people who found capitalism, even when they were critical, which they weren't, particularly John Stuart Mill, but they were people in it, people of it, and people who, if they were critical, thought it could be fixed, improved, and so on. Marx was a critic. He didn't like capitalism. He thought the human race could do a lot better, and he set about to show how that was. So it's a different mindset that he had. He wasn't interested in showing how it was efficient, produced growth, generated prosperity. When he felt it necessary, he talked about those things, and he admitted what it did and what it had going for it. He was very careful to do that. He admired capitalism's technological innovativeness. He admired its global spread. He admired its delivery of consumer goods. He admired all kinds of things about capitalism. But he did that in the framework of a clear position as a critic. Having said that, he developed his criticism as follows. In the core of capitalism as a system, he said, is a relationship that others have not attended to, or if they have, they haven't understood it. I am going to focus on it for two reasons. One, other people have missed it. It's an overlooked, neglected, ignored dimension of how a modern economic system works. And number two, I'm going to show you how it produces a whole host of undesirable consequences, this thing that other people haven't seen. Because I want you to see that if you agree with me about those other undesirable consequences, for example, instability, unemployment, and all of that, well then, you're going to understand that if you share my criticism of those consequences, you have to go with me to the core out of which those consequences flow. What is that core? It is in the organization of production. That's where the problem, in a sense, the secret, the kernel lies. We have to analyze how production is organized inside the enterprises where production goes on. The firms, the companies, whatever you want to call it, where goods and services are produced. We have to look into the, if you like, the core of that enterprise, of that relationship of people inside there, and see it for what it is, and then trace out the consequences. By saying that, Marx already separates himself from all the other economists of his time. They didn't do that. For example, in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, he's very excited about what modern economics is still very excited about. Markets, exchange, buying and selling. This is not complicated. You can examine the economic system by focusing on buying and selling. You buy a shirt, a company hires a worker, buying and selling. It's an important transaction. But it's a different thing than looking on the organization of production. Modern economics is about exchange and markets, how markets work, how people relate to markets, how markets have consequences. Very interesting question. Marx, on occasion, got interested in it too, but it was a side matter for him. He didn't think you would understand the problems of capitalism by focusing, where all the conventional people did, on markets. He suspected, and sometimes said it with humor, that they focused on markets not because they were so interested in markets, but because they were so afraid, consciously or otherwise, of looking at the production process. So for example, for those of you not familiar with it, in a modern curriculum in economics, you will have literally dozens of courses on markets and how they work. But a course on the organization of production inside an enterprise, you basically can't find. You'd have to go across the street to the other economics department that exists inside every university. It's called a business school. It's the only discipline in the American university that looks like this. Every university has two economics departments. One is called the economics department, the other one's called the business. You don't have two history departments, you don't have two sociology departments, you don't have two English literature. What is going on here? Answer. Economics, long ago, became the ideology of why capitalism is good. 27 courses in that. That's a very important thing, to get people to think about capitalism in a way that makes it look good. The trouble with that is, it doesn't teach you how the thing works, it just celebrates it. And this was a problem in American business because they wanted people to have courses that taught them how to actually run a business. So in order to get that job done, they tried to go to the economics professors. They didn't know anything about that. Their job was ideological justification. So they had to set up a parallel school called a business school, and then you take courses in marketing and pricing and advertising and all that stuff about running a business, because economics is useless to them. That's why in every modern university, there's a big tension. My whole academic life, we were caught in the economics department. We always had fights with the business school, since basically we do the same thing. And we wanted the university to fund us, and they wanted the university to fund them. It's a very tense relationship because it's so odd. Marx is out of the loop. He is not going to teach you how to run a business, he could care less. But he's also not going to celebrate capitalism. He's a critic. And his criticism came to begin, after all his research, in the organization of production. So let's turn then to what Marx said. How did he analyze it? What's in Volume 1? And the irony, just finished it, the irony of Volume 1 is it begins with exchange. I just told you that Marx focused somewhere else. Why would he start the book with exchange? He says it in his letters. I started with exchange because that's what everybody, when I was writing this book, thought economics was. I had to start there because it would be too shocking for the reader to begin in the place that looked like it was the wrong place to start. So I'm going to start with exchange, and then I'm going to show quickly why you have to go somewhere else if you want to understand what's going on. And that's what the first few chapters of Marx's Capital do. He starts talking about exchange and takes us to production. Here's how he does it. He asks the question which everybody who studies exchange asks, which is, why is the price of something what it is? Why is a pound of potatoes $3? Why is a shirt $20? Why is a hamburger $4? Whatever. It's a very big question that economists have worried about for a long time. These are not, by the way, economists who are very critical of the system. They're trying to understand prices. Marx begins by, okay, let's ask the question, what is shaping prices? And right away he plays a little game. He says that I am going to use the theory of prices of my two great predecessors, Adam Smith and Ricardo. That was very clever of Marx, because he therefore celebrates people that everybody likes because they love capitalism. The founder of modern economics, Adam Smith, and his great student, David Ricardo. Both British, both people who love capitalism. Clever of Marx to say, I'm going to use their theory. Makes him seem terribly part of the team. Doesn't look so weird yet. And he said, what did they use to explain prices? And they used something called the labor theory of value. Just a footnote again for some of you that may not be used to this. The labor theory of value. Is this something original to Karl Marx? No. Is this something unique to Karl Marx? No. The association of the value, labor theory of value with Marx is only done by people who don't know what they are, I hate to say it, talking about. Adam Smith had a labor theory of value. Right there in The Wealth of Nations, page after page, I can't miss it. And David Ricardo did all. So Marx took from them the labor theory of value. And here it is, not a complex idea. The price you pay for things in the market has to bear some relationship to the labor it takes to produce it. If it takes a lot of labor to produce it, the price is going to be a bit higher than if it doesn't. This, by the way, is not what you would call a deep insight. This is fairly straightforward, which is why Adam Smith figured it out, and Ricardo figured it out, and Marx found it interesting. But Marx found it interesting for a different reason. He said, yeah, it's all about labor, and let's talk about labor. How does it work in production that labor is a shaper of what things are worth in the market? A labor theory of value. And here's how he answered it. And I'm going to do it in simple English because these ideas are not complicated, and I'm going to try not to complicate them unnecessarily with arithmetic. First, he says, the value of something is got two kinds of labor in it. There's the labor being done right now by a working person using his or her brains and muscles to make something. But there's another kind of labor. Labor done at an earlier time that was necessary to produce the tools, equipment, and raw materials that the worker now is working on. You can't just count one kind of labor because you really need two kinds. The labor of a person working now, but you need the labor of all the people who produce the tools the worker now is using, and produce the raw materials the worker now is working on, etc. The work that went in to make the building where the labor is occurring, all of that. So there are two kinds of labor. One kind is called embodied labor. That's the labor done in the past, embodied in tools, equipment, and raw materials being used up now. And to that Marx added living labor, embodied labor in the past, and the living labor done now. And that gives you the total labor involved in producing anything. A hamburger, a software program, you name it. Okay? So the value, if you're going to think in terms of labor, the value of any product is the total amount of labor in it, the living labor done now as it's being produced, plus the embodied labor in the tools, equipment, and raw materials used up. Okay? Next, says Marx. Let's look at this from the point of view of the person who makes it happen. In our modern economy, he says, that person is called a capitalist, or an employer, or a company, or a corporation. At this point, we don't care about these things. They don't matter to us. Here's what that person does. That person starts with a quantity of money. Money. Okay? He uses a part of the money to buy tools, equipment, and raw materials, stuff made by workers in the past. That's what a business person does. He uses this, I'm going to use the pronoun he. I do not mean to imply that it isn't or wasn't or couldn't be a she. It has been, it could be. It's just he, she is kind of too awkward in my mouth. So, our capitalist buys tools, equipment, and raw materials that embody labor. But our capitalist also hires workers. He uses another part of his money to pay people to come and work with the tools and equipment he's purchased on the raw materials he's likewise purchased. Okay? These people work. That's what he hired them to do. And when they work, here comes the big punchline, when people work, they add value to the stuff they use up, the tools, equipment, and raw materials. Just think in real simple terms. I run a chair factory. You are a hired worker. I've paid you to come. In front of you, I put saws, hammers, glue, nails, and lots of raw wood. I give you instructions, and you apply your brains and muscle. You do labor to transform the tools, equipment, and raw materials into a finished product, a chair. When you do that, the according to Smith, Ricardo, and Marx, the worker adds value. So, for example, if there are 5 hours, the number 5, embodied in tools, equipment, and raw materials to make a chair, and there's another 5 hours of your labor as a chair worker then to produce the chair, then the chair has 10 units of value in it, 10 hours of labor, 5 embodied and 5 living labor. The workers add value by and through their work. Okay? Workers generate, living workers, value added. That's why the employer hires them. He hires them because he is going to sell the output for 10. The 5 that he paid of tools, equipment, and raw materials, and the 5 added by the worker. Okay? That's how production works, Marx says. But here now comes his insight, the central insight of his analysis of production. He says the capitalist gets from the worker the value added by the worker when he works. In my example, the 5. Why? Because the way capitalism works, the worker, you all know this because you've all done it. You come to work on the appointed day, at the appointed time, at the appointed place. You use your brains and muscles like your employer tells you. When you're done and you've produced the chair, you go home. You leave the chair there. If you take the chair, people in dark blue uniforms come and hurt you. You know that. So you don't do it. So the employer gets the chair. By the way, Marx loved, and in Capital he makes jokes about it, he loved to ask the philosophical question. And he did it even more in his other writings. What an immense time and process it takes historically to make people do what I just so glibly described. You know, if you didn't train people properly, they might not want to do that. They might not want to spend 5 hours of their brains and muscles producing something that is instantaneously and automatically belongs to somebody else. It might, you know, piss them off. They might get even excited that they were being, I don't know, stolen from. They might use words like, I'm being, I don't know, alienated from my own product. So it takes a long time to persuade a population that this is as normal and unobjectionable as most of us in this room take it to be. We don't have time for that, but Marx does. It's gold for you to read it. Marx says, here's the punchline now, as I promised. The value of what the employer gets from your labor, you're a worker, is the addition of the value laid out that the employer spent to buy the tools, equipment, and raw materials, plus the value added by the worker. But the rub is, the insight is, the capitalist gets the value added by you. That doesn't tell us how much the capitalist pays you to come there and do it. That's what has to be kept separate. The capitalist gets the fruits of your labor. That's how the system works. So the question, the $64 billion, or in the modern economy, the $64 trillion question is, how much does the capitalist pay the worker to do the 5 hours and add 5 units of value into that chair? Let's go through the possibilities. One possibility would be that the capitalist, the hirer, the employer, pays the worker for the 5 hours that the worker does, 5 hours worth of stuff, whatever it is. In other words, I can pay you 5 hours worth of money or 5 hours worth of grain, whatever it is, for your 5 hours. Let's go through that. The capitalist then pays 5 for the tools and equipment and raw material, pays 5 to you, the worker. You end up with a $10 worth of chair, 10 hours worth of chair. He sells it, he gets 10, which is just equal to what he paid out. What's left for the capitalist in this arrangement? Nothing. I can assure you that no capitalist, more than once, would engage in this absurd activity because there's nothing in it for him. So how do we explain, if you like, the existence, let alone the proliferation of capitalism? What is capitalism, since it cannot be a system in which the employer pays the worker the equivalent of the value added by the worker? Answer. Capitalism is a system that based on, depends on, is at its core constituted by arrangements in which the capitalist pays the worker, ready? Less than 5 to do the 5 hours worth of work. He pays the worker, pick a number, 4. I give you 4 hours worth of stuff for you to come here and work 5 hours. Let's see now how that works. Our capitalist had to spend 5 for the tools, equipment, and raw material. But in our new story, he only has to pay 4 for the worker. The worker comes and works 5 hours. By adding 5 and 5, the chair is worth 10. Our capitalist sells the chair for 10. He gets back 10. He uses 5 to replace the tools, equipment, and raw materials used up. He uses 4 to pay the worker what he promised him, and he gets to keep 1. Now we can see why a capitalist would do this. He basically needed 9 to get the production process going, and he ends up with 10, an extra 1 for him. This extra Marx called surplus. Just a footnote, because this is, sometimes you have to do a little bit of extra. The word surplus is an English word. It's a very bad translation. Marx didn't use the word surplus. It doesn't exist. Marx used the German word mehr, M-E-H-R, which in German simply means more. And it's the point I told you here. The worker adds more value than he gets paid. It's that more value that is the source of the capitalist's surplus. It's more. It was a very bad English translation to introduce the word surplus, which has all kinds of connotations in English that the word mehr does not have in German. One of those problems when you move across languages. Anyway, what is this surplus? This surplus is Marx's explanation for what profit is. This is crucial. Where profit comes. What is profit? When a company announces a profit, what is it? Answer. It's the peculiarly capitalist way of beginning to take account of this. Let me assure you, even though I don't have the time to do it here, that in conventional economics, the neoclassical tradition that is taught in American universities, there's a completely different theory and explanation of profit. This is Marx's explanation. The profit of capitalists, therefore, and nothing is more important than this, that you understand, the profit of capitalists is based on the relationship in the act of production. The relationship between the person who buys the worker's capacity to work. What the price is that he pays for, how much he gives the worker. And the comparison between that and what the worker gives back, in a sense, to the employer in the value added in the production of whatever the employer sells. So profit is not about, here we go now, ready? It's not about technology. It's not about the machine. It's not about how hard people are working. It's not about how clever a capitalist is. It's none about those things. That's all a different theory, the one that you'll read in the New York Times. In Marxian theory, it has to do with the relationship between two people. Those who engage labor and those who do the labor.
Yeah. How close does that come to the classical economics idea? Or the idea of power?
Well, here's the irony. In modern economics, the kind that is taught in the United States, neoclassical economics, almost anywhere, not just in the United States, but in most of the world, there is no surplus. Very important. I know many of you are interested. I sometimes teach a course that compares the different theories, because you do have to struggle in the world in which different theories are dominant than Marxism. To make a very complex story short, here's how the conventional theory explains it. Here we go. Ready? Here we go. Production is a partnership. Notice the language, because it's a giveaway. The worker brings the labor. The landlord provides the land, and the capitalist brings the capital. And then they all get together and they produce output. And then they divide the output according to each one's contribution. The worker gets a wage, and the landlord gets the rent, and the capitalist gets the profit. You could call this fairsies. Very important. Doesn't it sound wonderful? So three different people get together, they do it nicely together, and then they divide it up. It's like three toddlers having a picnic, sharing out the cookies. The image here is one of what? No conflict, no exploitation, no one ripping anybody off, a fair, harmonious, by the way, Adam Smith used the word harmony, a harmonious arrangement of production. Marx is telling you a radically different story. Somebody is getting something for nothing here, isn't they? Somebody is ripping off somebody. Right in the core of production, people are getting screwed. Very different theory. Let me jump to the punchline in a sense. A system, an economic system, that places in the core, in the guts of its production organization, a conflict of the sort I've just told you, will of course be unstable, fraught with tension, fraught with problems, unhappy. Why? It's as if you organized a gathering of your friends and carefully chose to invite sworn enemies to come with you to the beach. It's not a recipe for a nice time. This is a recipe for an explosion. That's what Marx's point is. He's going to show us that if you organize production in this way, you're going to have endless trouble. But before we get to that, let's follow Marx's logic. The capitalist, then, has every interest, to begin to see it now, in trying to get the worker to come for less. Look at the story I told you. Suppose we change a little number. Instead of having to give the worker 4, suppose our capitalist can only give him 3. Then the worker comes and does his 5 units of labor. The chair, as always, is worth 10. But what did it cost our capitalist now? 5 for the tools, equipment, and raw materials, plus 3 for the worker, which means 8. And he sold it for 10, he gets 2. It's all, here comes the tension of it, it's always desirable for the capitalist to get workers cheaper. Is there a modern application right now for this? I'll give you 2. Why are there 10 million Mexicans in the United States? What is that about? Why? Because they work for less. You can fire an American citizen and hire a legal, or even better, an illegal one, because you pay him even less. Why do American companies shut down in New Jersey and open in Shanghai? Hello, the wage in Shanghai is low by comparison to the wage in New Jersey. So of course, capitalists will bring in cheaper and move to wherever cheaper is. Only thing that will hold them back is, of course, the costs of the move, the risks of the move. Could be a problem, and that might hold them back. Or maybe a law that says you can't do it, that would be a problem. But it's always interesting for the capitalist to lower the wage. In other words, Marx is saying built into your production process is not only the basic rip-off, worker adds value more than worker is paid, but built into that is the constant provocation of the worker by the capitalist, who is forever looking for ways to reduce this number. Why? Because for every nickel that he can reduce the pay he gives the worker, that's more profit in his pocket. That's not a recipe for cooperation. That's a recipe for ruthless struggle. And that's been the history of capitalism. All the different ways that you can struggle. And Marx is at great pains to tell this story. Next, let's do the next part of the basic theory. Let's assume, just for simplicity, that we're paying 3 to our workers. They're adding 5 hours of labor, just like in our story. So our capitalist lays out 5 for tools, equipment, and raw materials used up, and 3 to hire the worker. By the way, you know how workers work. You hire them, they come and work for you, and then you pay them after they've done the work. So he does his hours, you have the chair, you sell the chair, you get the money, then you pay him the 3. You got 10, because that's what's the labor in the product. So you use 5 to pay off the bills on your tools, equipment, and raw materials, 3 to pay off the worker, and 2 is left for you, the surplus value. Now, in Marxian theory, Marx asks the question, which logic requires you to ask if you reason like this. He asks the question, what happens to the surplus? What does the capitalist do with this surplus when he gets it? Once you do this kind of analysis, if you generated a surplus, you've shown people how that works, you must ask the question, what happens to it? Now you might imagine, because it is part of our culture, you might imagine that it's a kind of a happy, uncomplicated story. Our capitalist has a feast, or 6. Or he lives in a farm, wonderful house. Or he has dozens of automobiles, or whatever. This is a fantasy. It's not Marx's argument. The capitalists, it turns out, have a lot of things they have to spend the surplus on. What? Yeah?
So I was wondering, what is the explanatory role of labor theory? Because everything would be reformulated by like prices, like market prices. And given if everything was measured in market prices, we would see the explanation of that. Because,
I'm not sure I would understand even what you're saying.
for example, if the capitalist sells its share in whatever price it is and pays the workers less, regardless of the value involved, or the underlying theory of value, we could say almost the same thing.
Yes, but what you would have done is you would have equated the price to this labor value. That's not what is ever done in conventional economics. They could give a completely different explanation of what determines the prices, supplies and demands and all of that, and they would infer that those are shaped by people's desires, and so these prices are what people want them to be. They satisfy people. So the price has nothing to do with a struggle between the employer and the employee. The price is what happens in the market when millions of people anonymously decide what to spend their money on, what they like, and so on. It's a theory in which what happens in the economy is a function of people's desires, preferences, their utility they derive from objects. That's a completely different idea. And that's why in that kind of theory, there is no surplus. It's not that they disagree about how to explain it. It's not there. The normal condition in capitalism is no surplus at all. And if there is a surplus, it's a dysfunction of the system in neoclassical theory. It's something isn't working right, a market imperfection, a screw up in the supply and demand, which will then be automatically gotten rid of by people's adjustments, so it's nothing we have to think about. There is no surplus. It's very important to understand that conventional economics is so terrified of the Marxian argument that it can't come up just with a different explanation of the surplus. That you would do if the concept itself wasn't so scary, different. This whole thing is like that. It's the equivalent in economics of denying holocausts. Just to take it neutral. Let me continue. What happens to this surplus? What's the story here? The capitalist gets the surplus. No question about it. That's what he's in the business to do. But a capitalist quickly learns, if you haven't already figured it out, that there is no guarantee that the worker will continue to come, that everything will be in order, that the process will be reproduced over time. No guarantees. Let me give you an example. This worker, the one who gets paid 3, may live in a little house someplace, and like many other workers, on the way home from the job at the end of the day, stop in at the local bar and have a couple of beers. In the local bar might be sitting, I don't know, me, waiting for him. And as he comes in, I slide over and sit next to him in the booth. And I strike up a friendly conversation, and I buy him a beer. And I begin to tell him this story, how it works. And he nods, because he's been feeling as though, you know, the way a lot of workers do every day, I'm ripped off here. I don't like coming here. I come here every morning, I'm kind of high as a kite because I can't stand it here. I go to the bar right away afterwards for that happy hour because I'm so unhappy all the other hours. Well, that's why I go. And this man, me, he's telling me I have every right to feel ripped off. I'm really being ripped off. This is a problem because that worker going back to work the next day is a different worker. He now is not just wondering why he doesn't feel so good. He has a story to tell, which he will tell to the other workers. This is a problem. So there needs to be something in the society that prevents that problem from arising or deals with it when it does. This is called, the solution that many capitalist societies have found, is called public education. You require young people to go to school, and you require them to be given a curriculum, and you require the curriculum to contain in it a story about how production is the happy and harmonious coming together of workers, landlords, and capitalists who cooperate to produce and then share in a fair way. You get the picture? Who pays for that? Who pays for public education? Well, a part of the surplus is taken by the government from the capitalists and used to run a public school system. This is very interesting because the government does not ask the capitalist to give it. The capitalist is told by the government, you will take a portion of your surplus, or in modern language, there will be a tax rate applied to your net revenue that you have to give to the government, and we will use for, among other things, public education. Here's another problem for our capitalist. He's got a factory where the chairs are made. Turns out, in the neighborhood where the factory is located, there are some poor and angry people. And they have been known in the dead of night to come and snatch the chairs from where they are stored, to steal the hammers and the nails. So our capitalist has got a problem, because if he doesn't do anything, it won't be any good to hire a worker to come tomorrow and pay the worker $3, because there won't be enough nails, or there won't be lumber, or there won't be something. So our capitalist has to make an expenditure. It's very interesting. Marx is very clear about this. He has to make an expenditure that has, ready now, nothing to do with chair production. He has to hire a worker, just like you and me, but not to make chairs, which is what the company's in business. He hires this worker, dresses him up in a uniform, which he also has to buy, gives him a walkie-talkie and a gun, and here's your job. You walk around the premises of this chair factory all night long to discourage people from coming and stealing the material. Where does the money come from to pay this person who's not going to come in a uniform and walk around an empty factory all night long, not an usual activity, unless he's paid? So a portion of the surplus goes for security. I'll give you a few other examples, quickly. You need lawyers in case you get sued. Somebody sits on the chair falls apart, they hurt their back, they sue you. You got it. If you don't do something, it'll stop you from functioning. So you need to have a lawyer. You've got to pay a lawyer. We're still not done. Turns out your workers come to work every so often, they're drunk. They're drunk. And it's dangerous. They mess up the machines, they hurt themselves, they hurt other workers. You got to do something. You know what you need? You figure out, in order to keep your factory going, to get these workers who come in drunk to function, you need an alcohol counseling program. So you set up an office in a corner of the factory, you hire a nurse or somebody who's skilled, and who pays for all of that? The nurse. It turns out, to generalize, that capitalists have to distribute their surpluses to a whole host of activities that, to use the language that's best for this, provide the conditions of existence for the workers to produce the surplus. And if you don't spend your surplus this way, you will not be able to get surplus from those workers who actually make chairs. So in Marxian theory, a distinction is made right at the beginning between two kinds of workers in capitalism. Those who actually make a surplus, whose value added is larger than what they're paid, and the value added is realized when the capitalist sells the output. Those people are called productive laborers. Then there are all the other workers who provide conditions of existence, and those are called unproductive laborers because their activity doesn't generate a surplus. Not only do they not make a surplus, they actually live off the surplus that the other workers make. Now, just a footnote, because I could teach a whole course on this. It means that in Marxian theory, right at the basis, there is a radical difference between two different groups of workers. The notion that Marx has an undifferentiated concept of the working class, that we're all together, all of us who earn wages. That's an argument only made by people who haven't read it. Marx says there's one kind of worker who produces a surplus and another kind of worker who lives off that surplus and who actually provides the conditions that allow the first worker to be exploited, that is, to produce more than he gets. If you recognize that, then not only are these workers different in their relationship to the surplus, but these are workers who could easily be set against each other because they have some conflict between them. And therefore, if you're going to organize the working class to be a political force to change a society, you've got to deal with these fundamental differences and come up with a strategy to overcome them. Calling everybody a wage earner, and therefore we all have in common that we earn wages, means that you have ignored this difference, which is at the core of Marxian theory. Many things are done in the name of Marx and Marxism that are really done often by well-meaning people. It's not that, but they don't know. Marxian theory is a complicated and sophisticated apparatus. You don't have to learn it, but it pays to learn it, and if you do, you'll reason differently about political problems than if you don't, which is one of the values of doing it. So in Marxian theory, yes, ma'am?
Could you give more examples of unproductive laborers?
Unproductive labor, sure. Here's another one. A secretary sitting in the office of this chair factory. Let's suppose her job is the following. She keeps track of attendance, what workers miss a day because they're sick or they have a personal day or whatever it is. She keeps track because she has to make out the payroll slip. She does all the work that a secretary would often do. Does she make chairs? No. But if the capitalist doesn't keep orderly records about his workers, he won't know who's there, who's not there. He doesn't know who to pay, who not to pay. It'll undermine his ability to function. So he needs a secretary. Here's another example. Managers. Management. What does a manager do? Let's go through some of the things. Does a manager make chairs? No. Here's some things managers do. We have the disciplinary manager. His job is to install cameras in the bathrooms to make sure that you're not smoking in there and that you don't spend more than 1.6 minutes doing what you should be doing in there and nothing else. That's his job. And it's important because he doesn't want the employer doesn't want to lose your time in the toilet when you could be working. That's a condition of existence, that the paid worker is actually working. The manager provides a condition of existence, like the security guard, like the government education apparatus, like the secretary. That's an unproductive labor. Doesn't make chairs. Here's another manager. A manager whose job it is to go out and buy the tools, equipment, and raw materials, pick the lumber, buy the nails. By the way, it's called in a business these days purchasing manager. It's a name for something. It's like another kind of manager is called a sales manager. What does the sales manager do? Well, just what the name says. The job of the sales manager is to convert the output chair into money by selling it. Does he make chairs? Not at all. When he converts the chair, he's converting 10 units of value in the form of chair into 10 units of value in the form of money. He's converting value from one form to another. He's not adding any value. He's not making anything. So managers, all of them, are unproductive laborers. There's an awful lot of those people in our society. An awful lot. And a capitalist, what is this? A capitalist, I'm not going to pull you to be sympathetic with capitalists. You might think their job is done when they've got some poor worker to come for 3 and give them 5. That's just the beginning. That's the part of their job where they get the surplus out of the worker. But if they're going to survive as a capitalist, they have another job just as important. They have to distribute it. And woe if they make a mistake. Suppose, for example, they are convinced they need more secretaries to keep track of the workers. So they hire 2 more secretaries with their surplus. That means they don't have the surplus for the security guard. So they lay off the security guard, and they buy 2 secretaries, and that night, everything is stolen out of the factory. They're finished. They're done. They have collapsed as a capitalist. When those workers come the next morning to work, the factory's boarded up, they're out of a job. End of story. Why? Because the capitalist, in deciding how to distribute his surplus, didn't do it right. Here's another example to use. One of the things you better do is you better have, if you're a big company, a special department called R&D, Research and Development. You hire some scientists and some clever people, and they have one of 2 tasks. either to come up with a more efficient production system or to come up with something new to sell, a new gadget, a new version of your chair. You know, a chair that you sit on and a recording begins of your favorite songs or whatever, okay? So they're doing this because, why? Because if you don't come up with a clever new chair, but another company does, then everybody will buy the other companies and you will be out of business. You will have bought tools and equipment, just like you should. You will have hired workers at 3, just like you should. You've got your chairs with 10 in them, just like you should. But here comes the punchline, you can't sell them because everybody's buying another kind of chair. You better make sure you're keeping up. And that even if somebody else comes up with a chair that has a recording in it, you have a department that can replicate that pretty quick, or else you're dead. So you need to sustain a whole bunch of, ready, unproductive laborers, people who don't make anything that the company sells. They work on a new technology or altogether new commodity. So capitalists need to sustain an army of unproductive laborers in order to get the surplus out of their productive laborers. Very important that you understand this. Capitalists are forever agonizing over both issues. How do I get more surplus out of my workers? And how do I distribute that surplus to survive? It's always better to get more surplus because the more you have, the more you can distribute, sure. But you still have to make the terrible decision, which is why capitalists get heart attacks at an early age. This is a harrowing situation. Yeah?
How do politicians make that?
Good. Let's go back to the government. The corporation is required in most countries to pay a portion of this surplus to the government. And by the way, because the government provides conditions of existence. I'll give you the most dramatic example. You're a capitalist. These workers, having talked to me in the bar, come the next day and say, we don't like getting paid 3, we know we're giving you 5. We want the whole 5. Give them the finger. What is the capitalist going to do? I'm not going to do that. Fine, said the workers. Then we're going to sit here and urinate on the machines. Uh-oh. What now? He's just a capitalist. There's an awful lot of these workers, and they're about to urinate on the machine. He needs to have a service, and he has one. He goes to the telephone, he dials it. He reaches a place called the police station. He tells them the story, and quick as a wink, in trucks and cars, come a phalanx of men with sticks who beat these workers in and say, if you urinate on that machine, even more terrible things will happen to you. This is extremely useful. He just has to pick up the dump. Wait a minute. Those workers, those police people have to be paid. That car has to be fueled. The truck has to be purchased. The jail has to be, lit, and it has to be watered. They're very expensive. The government does all that. And the capitalist has a condition of his existence as a capital secured. It's a kind of security. And the government provides security. Here's other things the government provides. It goes around the world and makes sure people in foreign countries who might like to buy stuff made there don't. They buy it from America. That allows our company to sell all the chairs because the government has a diplomatic office in every place, making sure that those people know and appreciate American goods. And there's public education that goes on, and that's what the politicians are for. The politicians there their job is to take the money that the corporations give them and use it for what the corporations need. But what is it that the corporations have done? Mr. Footnote. It's always a problem in these courses. There's so many questions and so many interesting places to go with it. But that's what Marxian theory is good about. But let's do this one. The corporations long ago figured out, wait a minute, we're spending a portion of our surplus to help the government run a public school system. Here's something would be better for us. Get them to run a public school system, teaching those kids what we want them to teach, but instead of us paying for it, let these workers pay for it. At this point, if I had a record player, we'd play the national anthem. In other words, it's always interesting to push the tax bill off of the corporate surplus and on to the workers' wages. What that would mean is the worker gets paid 3, but he doesn't take home 3. He only takes home 2.5. Notice that in your check? The money that's withheld and sent to the government. The problem is, of course, if you make the workers pay, then the workers will feel a bit more emboldened about demanding that the government use that money not to do what's good for the corporate capitalist, but to produce, say, a swimming pool in the neighborhood for the people. Now we got a problem. Politicians are the people who receive the pressure of the two taxpayers, the workers on the one hand, and the surplus appropriators on the other, and who likewise have to deal with the pressure of these two communities in terms of what the government's going to do. And so the politician is caught in that contradiction. That's his job, to manage that contradiction. And if he goes too far in one direction, they throw him out. And if he goes too far in the other, they also throw him out. Which is why politicians often look for a way out. How do you, if you're a politician, how do you solve the problem that the capitalists don't want to pay more taxes, and the mass of people refuse to pay taxes, but they both demand that you provide them with services? Well, here's the solution modern politicians have discovered. The way you can keep the taxes down on both the businesses and the workers, and still spend money to produce services, is by borrowing the money. Which is why governments around the world are now borrowed so high that the creditors, the banks, the rich people, the large corporations that lend to governments, have begun all around the world to say to the governments, we're not going to lend you anymore because you're so in debt that we can see something coming. You're not going to pay us back. You're going to welch on the deal, and we're going to take steps. Well, what happens then is that the creditors say to the government, you must, if you want us to continue lending to you, and by that time the government can't function without lending. I'm not sure you're aware. Half of what the United States government is doing now, it's doing with borrowed money. So try to imagine if the creditors of the United States say, we're not lending you anymore, then half of what the government, they'll do half of the street cleaning, the other half they won't. Try to imagine it. You can't. So the governments are all like this. They have to go to their creditors and say, please keep lending to us. Now the creditors say, you're not a reliable borrower anymore. Governments have become subprime borrowers. And here's what around the world is happening. The creditors are going to the government and saying, we're not going to renew your loan. Best example, for the last 6 months, the whole country of Greece dangles on a string. Why? Because the creditors of Greece have said to the Greek government, you're too much in debt. You've been borrowing like there's no tomorrow to deal with your, they're going to use this language because they're not Marxist. You have been borrowing to deal with your class contradictions in your economy. We're not going to lend you anymore unless you do the following. You must raise taxes and put that money aside. And you must cut government services and put the money you save aside. And that money has to be set aside to assure us that you're going to pay us the interest you owe us and you're going to pay back that loan. And if you don't do that, you're not going to get another loan and then you're going to fall apart. The name of a demand on a government by a creditor to raise taxes and or cut social programs is called austerity. You've been reading about it in the newspaper, you're going to be reading about it a lot. The austerity programs imposed on governments are pushed on them by the creditors who have been lending to governments because the governments cannot resolve this contradiction that Marx locates in the core of the economy. Now let's footnote that. What have I just done? I've taken an abstract Marxist theory of how production works and used it to explain the Greek problem and the austerity. That's a very powerful theory that can do that. That's a very powerful theory that can move that seamlessly from an abstract story about how a chair factory works to give you a good understanding of the austerity that, by the way, is shaping your life and that of millions of people around the world as austerities are being imposed everywhere. But if you want the key examples of this, here's the countries to watch now. Greece, Portugal, and right now the real killer, Ireland. Ireland, those of you of Irish background, that is a society in complete disintegration. The only country I know of right now that's in worse shape is Mexico. These are societies that are on the edge of dissolving as such. Sir.
Often now when you hear about rising profits, often people say that it's due to efficiency gains, and it's not squeezing more out of the worker. Now, can that be, in terms of this theory, can it be explained away in terms of the unproductive expenses that would be negating, or is that, like, I'm often confused about that, because I'm wanting to say that's wrong, just because I don't know the words.
Okay. I'm going to talk for another 5 minutes, then partly because of the taping, we're going to have just a few minute break. We've taken a bit longer than we should, so I'm going to have to go a little fast. On that question, let's go back to what profits are. Right? Profits is a category of modern corporate accounting. By the way, in case you think that profits is something we all know what that is, no, that's not the case. If you go to an annual meeting of the American Society of Accountants, they have their professional association like everybody else. And I've been to their annual meetings. There'll be a dozen panels in which different accountants debate what should be the measure of profitability. What is a profit? How do we figure it out? So there's as much debate about that category as anything else. But in general, profits are calculated in our modern economic system real simply. You take all the revenues that a company gets, you subtract all the costs that it has, and the difference, the net revenue, is the profits. The problem with that is it makes no distinction between the productive workers, you have costs to pay, and the unproductive workers. So for example, an efficiency gain could mean that this worker can make more chairs in the same amount of time that he used to. But it could also just as well mean that a secretary can keep more records of more workers than she used to because of a computer or something else. So the problem with efficiency is it makes none of these distinctions. Can an efficiency help a company's profits? Yes, but it doesn't affect its surplus. It's very important that you understand that. Surplus is just the difference between the value added by the productive workers and what they get paid. That's all it is. It has nothing to do and is not affected by the technical efficiency of the work. That changes the amount of goods an hour's worth of labor produces, but it doesn't affect the relationship. If I had time, I would explain to you why that is. It's right in volume 1 of Capital, so if you go there, I'll even be glad to tell you afterwards what parts to read, that's all. This doesn't mean that it doesn't matter for a particular company. It can give them all kinds of advantages. But in terms of the basic relationship between the worker and the capitalist,
why capitalists are willing to go through all these troubles and headaches and maybe end up dying from heart attack just to divide in the surplus? Why don't they just adopt the cooperation way and get the profit and everybody's happy?
Absolutely, wonderful question. But really, that's a wonderful question. But it's a little bit like asking an alcoholic, why don't you just stop? Or remember President Reagan's wife, I forget her name.
Just say no.
Just say no.
Yeah.
People who have an addiction, just say no. Well, in a sense, it's a brilliant thing. Why don't you just stop, since you'd be better off? But the answer is the entire biography of that person, how they got to that situation. All the pressures, all the tensions, all the demands that life put on them in their home and their family led them then to a behavior which you see does all kinds of damage, which it does. But what you don't see, although if you got close to the person you would, is all the problems it solves, all the pains it avoids, all the crises it goes around. There's a field called psychotherapy. When you find yourself doing something that hurts you, you go eventually, if you've got to have a brain, to a psychotherapist, and really what that person does is help you figure out what good all of this bad behavior is doing. And then you try to figure out, are there other ways I can get those needs met that don't involve me cutting myself or drowning myself or working myself to the bone? Your question is very good because it takes that personal idea and asks it on a social level. Why would capitalists do this? Are they a happy group of people? No. Look, they understand, as I hope you do, that it is better to have more money than less. And probably true. But once you have more money, you discover real quick, it's not what it's cracked up to be. And it brings with it a whole new set of problems. But that requires your question to be pushed on people. They would have to ask your question a lot. They would have to be given the idea, people, that there is an alternative. I do more public speaking about this than any of you. I did 3 radio interviews today alone before I got here. I got 2 television tomorrow, 2 more than that. And I say in my appearances exactly what I say here. I don't pull any punches. But this is a new experience. This has been true for 15, 16 months. In the previous 40 years of my life here in the United States, I never had this before. Something is different in the United States. It is now possible to say. It's possible for your question to be raised not just by you, not just in the Great Forum, but all over the country. And it's possible for people like me to give an arresting answer like, yeah, there's alternatives. We don't have to do this. We don't have to be at each other all the time. We don't have to have a society that organized like this. But it is slow going. And on the other side, there are lots of forces that say to you, this is the best arrangement. Yeah, you may get a heart attack, but you'll be better off this way than any other way. And if you try anything else, everything will fall apart. Come on, that's how history has worked. Let me remind you, we used to have kings, you know, a king or a czar or an emperor. He made all the decisions. If you disagreed with him, you lost your head, literally, real quickly. End of story. There were no courts, there was nothing. And when people were struck, this is no good, the man told me, he's a no, nut. Didn't make any difference. People couldn't, if you got rid of the king, then we would be like a body without a head. We would all go nutty and crazy and civilization would fall apart. It took generations to convince people, no, here's what you can do. You go to the king, cut his head off, and nothing happens. The sun comes up anyway. I'll give you another example. In most societies, and in many to this day, when it comes time for you to reach your sexual maturity and to find a partner, your parents go out and get you a suitable mate. The idea in these societies that you would go out and look yourself, try this one out, try that one, sleep with this one. Ooh, impossible. That would be sacrilegious. That would end civilization. You're too young. You don't know what the world is like. Your hormones are out of control. This has to be done for you by your parents. And civilization would come to a crashing halt if we did it any other way. How many of you are checking out with your parents who you date? Not too many, I would hope. We managed it. Civilization didn't end. Here's a new thought. Instead of a capitalist, a board of directors, shareholders, you come to work, you do the work, you go home, you leave it behind. Here's a new arrangement. Monday to Thursday, the workers come to work. Friday, they come to work. They don't make software, they don't make hamburgers. They sit around all day having meetings, deciding what to produce, where to produce, how to produce, and what to do with the profits. Workers are their own board of directors, they are their own capitalists. The distinction between worker and capitalist is eliminated. This has been going on for hundreds of years. Such enterprises exist in the United States right now. They're perfectly viable. But you have to show people that there is such an option so they can begin to think what it would be like. So if I get elected president, my first act, I created a department that will immediately fund enterprises that are worker-operated the way I just described, so that all Americans will have freedom of choice. You can either go to work in a conventional capitalist enterprise, or you have the freedom of choice to go to one in which you are part of the management. And we as consumers will also have a new freedom of choice. We can buy the products of capitalist enterprises, or we can buy the products of cooperative enterprises. And then let's see what the American people choose. That's what I would do because of my deep commitment to the American ideal of freedom of choice. Ha, ha, ha. Get the idea. Okay, let's resume and let's now move into what is section 2. I want to talk to you a little bit, given what we've done, about the relationship between enterprises where surplus is being produced and appropriated by a capitalist, and another enterprise in capitalism where that is not going on. Because capitalism, remember I told you, has 2 different kinds of workers, productive and unproductive, we went through that. It also has multiple kinds of capitalists. If you read only volume 1 of Capital, there, because Marx is just talking about the production and appropriation of surplus, he uses an undifferentiated notion of capitalism, period. No adjective in front of it. Capitalists, those are the ones who get the surplus. And here I just made the same thing I said before into a rectangle. This is what you pay the worker to come and work. The whole rectangle is the value added by the worker. The difference between the whole rectangle, the value added by the worker, and the part you pay to the worker is the surplus value you get as a capitalist when you hire workers to produce commodities which you sell in the manner of the chair producer that I gave you before. Okay? Now I want to go with you from this kind of a capitalist, and we're going to now give this kind of a capitalist an adjective. I'm going to use the same adjective Marx himself uses. This is an industrial capitalist, just the language Marx used. And all that industrial means is this kind of capitalist employs productive workers to make something he sells, and thereby he realizes this surplus value. The difference of the total value of the output relative to what he, the capitalist, had to lay out, the tools, equipment, and raw materials, and for the workers. This is an industrial capitalist. Now, it turns out that our industrial capitalist has, among his many needs, remember we talked about he needs security, he needs the government, he needs managers and all of that. Here's something else a modern capitalist comes to need. By the way, did capitalists always need it? No. Remember the example I gave you of security. If you live in a neighborhood where there are no poor people, or where poor people wouldn't occur to them to come and bother you, you don't need to use your surplus for a security agent or a security guard because it's not a problem. You only spend your surplus to secure yourself against problems, risks. So here we come to a new phenomena that didn't always exist in capitalism, but nowadays is the norm everywhere. Capitalists need periodically to access money. Lots of it. Let me give you some examples. You're a capitalist, you make chairs, and you discover that your competitor, another chair producer down the road, just got hold of a fantastic new machine. That if you get that machine, it enables you to produce much more beautiful chairs, or many more chairs, or in some way to produce a chair that everybody will want to buy, so that your chair, which hasn't changed, is going to not be sold. You're not going to find it. So in order for you to survive, you've got to immediately go and buy one of those machines, so you're up to par and you will not be destroyed by your competitor. But you don't have the money. You don't have the money to suddenly make a big expenditure. So you do something. You discover, you're a capitalist, that in the neighborhood there is an entity, an institution, that collects all the little bits of money of local people. Having convinced them, don't put it in your mattress, don't bury it in a box in the backyard, bring it to our establishment, we will protect it. We will give you a record every month of how it's, we'll even give you a checkbook, you can write checks about it. Just come here, give us your money, and it'll be better for you than keeping it yourself. They may or may not succeed. Let's assume they succeed. So there is in the neighborhood a pot of money in an institution called a bank. By the way, those had to arise over time. They didn't always exist. A bank is a kind of financial institution, part of what we mean by finance. So our capitalist, here we go now, goes to the bank and he gets the money he needs to buy that new machine. He secures a condition of existence, namely that new machine, by being able to access credit. Here's the deal. He can keep the loan for 6 months, a year, 5 years, whatever it is, but he must not only pay back the loan, but he must pay a fee for that loan. We call it an interest payment, or an interest rate. Where does the interest come from? That's part of his surplus. He has to keep paying that interest all the time, because that's what guarantees his access to credit. The only reason he could go to that bank and get the money is he's been paying interest as he owes it, because if you stop paying interest, you will quickly discover that the lender won't lend to you anymore. So there's an institution called a bank. What is its relationship to capitalist production? Here we go. It provides capitalists a condition of existence. It gives them credit as, when, and how they want it. It's crucial for their survival to have that. It's as crucial as having a lawyer, having the government, having managers, having the security guard, and all the other things we gave as examples. So they're going to take a portion of their surplus and pay interest to a bank, and fees maybe too, in order to be able to go when they need it, to survive, to keep going, and get their hands on a pile of money. This institution then, how does it live? It gathers money in whatever way it can. For example, let's use the one we have in the United States. All of you put your little money in your paycheck, and your grandma gives you a birthday present, you will put it in the bank, and you have a little savings account, a little checking account. And the bank does all that, and it gives you a checkbook, and in case you're not aware of it, the bank makes no money on any of that. That's a loser. They do that to get their hands on your money, to use your money while you're not using it. That's what's in it for them. They take that money that you deposit and they lend it to some company. You give them the money for next to nothing. You probably noticed that. They lend it to the company at a nice fat interest rate. They live off of the difference. The difference between what they give you to put the deposit in there and what they get from lending that deposit out. Okay? So we now have an entity that does what? Let's go now. It has costs. The teller that you have to go talk to. The machine that you have to go interact with. The little envelopes, they have to print those up. The monthly statement they mail you, they have expenses for all of that. That's their outlay. They also have revenue. That's the interest from lending to industrial capitalists. The difference between their lending interest that they earn and the cost of having the bank and the teller machine and all the rest is their profit. The difference between their income and their costs. But please notice, these are capitalists. They have money, that's their capital. They lend it out at interest, they make money that way. They have expenses for workers who keep record. They have all that, but notice, Marx calls them, by the way, in volume 3 of Capital, they are long chapters, go look at them, money-lending capitalists. Why would he put an adjective like that? Because they're not industrial capitalists. They don't make anything. They have no productive employees. All their employees are unproductive. They're not involved in the production of anything. There's no value added by anybody in the bank. So they're a different kind of capitalist. So the word capitalist, in a sense, in Marx, has a very distinctive definition. All that capitalist means is a person who uses money to make more money. A capitalist is a person who uses money to make more money. The industrial capitalist does it by using his money to arrange for that value added by a worker that's more than you pay the worker. That's what we did in the first part of today. This kind of capitalist does something completely different. He gathers money which he lends to an industrial capitalist and gets back more from him. He's a capitalist, but he has nothing to do with the production or appropriation of surplus. He, this one, the bank, is providing a condition of existence for this industrial capitalist who needs it. In return, a portion of the surplus that the industrialist capitalist gets from his workers is paid to the bank as interest. That's where their profit comes from. But they're what you might call an unproductive capitalist. And their employees are unproductive laborers. So, Bank of America, Citibank, Wells Fargo, any of them, they are, in this story, which is still relatively simple, they are a kind of capitalist that has nothing to do with the production and appropriation of surplus directly. They don't produce it, they don't appropriate it. They get a cut of the surplus produced and appropriated elsewhere because they provide a condition of existence. And they can become very powerful. Let's see how. Suppose these companies need to go to the bank often after inventions are being made by their competitors. Then you might get a situation where they become so dependent on the banks that the banks can say, well, I'll make you the loan you need, but you got to give me more interest. Otherwise I won't do it. A little bit like the story I told you about Greece before. You got to give me some incentive, I'm not going to do it. We could get to a situation where the banks demand so much surplus in the way of interest for the loans they give the capitalists, that there's not enough capital surplus left for these capitalists to survive. There won't be enough to pay the lawyer, pay the security agent, pay their taxes. We could have a situation where the banks become so powerful and the need of the industrialists for them so great that the whole situation could collapse because of the relationship between these two capitalists. In other words, capitalism has a class struggle, not only the sort I told you in the first part of today, between those who produce the surplus and those who appropriate it, but there's now another struggle, isn't there, between those who provide a condition of existence to our capitalists and that capitalist. He wants the credit with the least outlay of interest possible. They want the greatest interest possible for the loans they make. That may not work too well. They may come to blows. Capitalism can be hobbled by the tension and conflict between capitalists, which is of course a different kind of problem than a tension between the producers and the appropriators of the surplus. But Marxian theory pinpoints both of them. Now moving very fast. Banks, long ago, doing all of this, discovered that there are other people they can lend money to. They don't have to just lend it to an industrial capitalist. So let's see. They discovered that you can lend money to workers. This is cute. First, you get the workers to put the money in the bank as a deposit. And you give them, I don't know, 1%. Then you lend, you ready now? You lend the money back to them in the form of a credit card loan, and you charge them, average credit card loan in the United States today, 19%.
29.9.
What?
29.95.
Maximum. Average. Yes. Okay, so this is very exciting. You can lend to workers. Now, workers are crummy as borrowers because they go bankrupt, they don't pay, they disappear, they run away. So you jack up the rate to compensate you for those who don't come through. But this is very profitable. Then they discover they can also lend to governments. We talked about that a little while ago. To the United States, borrowing like there's no tomorrow today. Greece, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, they're all borrowing. So you can make money by lending to a government, and then you can make money by lending to other banks. This is very exciting. And banks do all of it. But now here comes the problem. When banks do that, they open this system up to new kinds of instability. Let me give you an example from the United States in the last year. Over the last 25 years in the United States, wages stopped rising. Some of you heard me explain this story. Wages stopped rising. We had a century and a half up until the 1970s of rising wages. Workers' wages in America rose for a century and a half. That's why immigrants came here. That's why America is a unique place. No other capitalist country delivered rising real standard of living to its people for 150 years. Yes?
Where is the place to look for the statistics? Because sometimes pro-capitalists
email it to me and I'll send you it. But there is, in case you want it, a book, I wrote it, for sale, if you want it, it has all that stuff in it too. Anyway, the workers' wages stopped rising in the 1970s. And American workers by then were addicted to consumption. The American dream, it's what I promised to my children, they live a better life than I do, all of that. So American workers reacted to the end of rising wages, not by stopping the rise of consumption, but by borrowing money, to make a long story short. They became a desperate class of people approaching the banks and saying, we'll pay you anything. For example, 29% a year for a credit card. Wild amounts of borrowing. The banks got terribly excited because workers were an untapped new borrower. You could charge them a fortune. And so they did. They gave them money like crazy. They've also been giving money to governments for the reasons I went through with you. Of course, what this does is it raises the following possibility. They lend so much to them that they overdo it, and they can't pay back. But when they can't pay back, then they don't have the money to lend to the industrial capitalists. That's what happened in 2008. The banks had lent to the American working class to buy homes. Millions of people had been given these loans who couldn't pay it back. When they stopped paying it back, these finance companies discovered that they weren't going to have the money coming back to them in payback of these loans that they had counted on. Therefore, they had no money. So they had to turn to the capitalists who came for the regular loan this month. We can't give you any loan. It's called a freezing up of the credit system. That's what happened in 2008. That's what collapsed world capitalism, and the United States still not out of that. That's why if you go to any small business convention now, they all scream, we can't get loans, we can't get loans. The finance, they're not going to lend to these people because they've been terribly burned by this whole system. Okay? A free enterprise system allows all of this to happen in whatever way is dictated by the opportunities for profit. The banks saw an opportunity in this situation with American workers, so they went. It worked nicely. For 20 years, it worked perfectly well. And then it didn't. And when it didn't, this relationship froze. And we went from 7 million unemployed people in December of 2007 to 15.5 million unemployed people today. A staggering collapse of everything. And it happened across the world. And that had to do with the tensions and the interaction between these two kinds of capitalism. If I had time, and we have run out, and I may do a little of this on next Tuesday when we reconvene, I'll introduce you to another kind of capitalist who isn't a productive capitalist, not an industrial capitalist, but isn't a money lender. This kind of capitalist, and I'll just tease you with it now, is a merchant capitalist. This is the kind of capitalist who neither produces anything nor is in the business of lending money. This is the kind of capitalist who does the following rather bizarre thing. He buys in order to sell the same thing. He's a merchant. He buys potato chips from the potato chip company, and then he sells you a single bag of potato chip. He buys it in big crates, and he sells them to you as an individual. Right? He's a merchant. He's a buyer and a seller. And I'm going to explain to you how he, the merchant, buys the output of the industrial capitalist, the potato chip maker, the shirt maker, the computer maker, and how he gets a profit even though the merchant doesn't produce anything. He just buys and sells something that's already been produced. Marx explains all of that in volume 3, and you're going to see how it is possible for a merchant to begin by providing industrial capital with a very useful function. I will buy what you produce as fast as you produce it. Why would an industrial capitalist be happy to do that? Because, remember I told you before about a sales manager? A capitalist who makes chairs has to pay somebody to go out and sell those chairs. No good to produce them unless you sell them. But selling them means you got to store them, you got to show them, you got to ship them around. It pays people. Imagine how happy you'd be if you were a chair producer if somebody came to you and said, you don't have to, you can fire all those managers you're paying, the sales staff, you don't need them. I will back up a truck to your factory and I will take every chair the instant it's produced. I'll take it. I'll worry about selling it. you could get that capitalist to give you a fat piece of his surplus to do that, because that's less of his surplus than he would have had to spend for his own sales department. And if you got a company that figured this out, it could go to every producer of almost everything and say, I'll take it all. At first, the capitalist says, great. And now he's selling everything to this company that picks it up in the back of the factory. And then one day that company comes to him and says, you know, we've been picking it up at the factory, we've been getting your fee, but now you depend on us. Everything, you can't live without selling it to us. Imagine if you had to try to sell all that crap yourself. We're a big company. We can buy it all because we have stores all over the world that sell this shit that you produce. And if you don't sell it to us, it'll take you 10 years to reproduce it. What's the name of this company? Walmart. And now, that's what it is. Walmart figured this out. Walmart studied Marx, not really. And they figured out, and so they can now go to a company and say, you've got to give us an immense amount of your surplus, or else we're not going to take your stuff anymore. And we sell everything. You're dead. You'll die. So what does the company do? It gives Walmart pretty much what it wants. And that's how Walmart became the single largest employer in the United States, one of the most profitable companies on the face of the earth. On the face of the earth. And the most interesting thing of all is that most of what Walmart sells here in the United States, it has gone to capitalists and it has said, you have to give me an enormous amount for me to keep taking this stuff. And it went to American producers all over the United States and said, I'm going to take more and more of your surplus. But if you don't give it to me, you'll never sell this stuff and you'll die. So the only thing that capitalists could do to save themselves in the face of Walmart was to close the factory making chairs here and go to another society where the workers don't get 3 in my example, they get 0.25 for 5 hours work. So the surplus you can get out of them is enormous. Now you can pay Walmart its huge fee and you still make out. What is the place to which American producers went in order to produce the goods they sell to Walmart to sell in the United States? The People's Republic of China. Walmart is the major distributor of the goods produced in China in the United States. The growth of China in the last 20 years is simultaneously the growth of Walmart. Each is a condition for the growth of the other. And it comes out of a relationship that I will work out with you when we meet again next Tuesday. So please finish the section 2 and then go on, and we're going to do an analysis of this stuff, class analysis, production, but in a surprising place, inside the household, where you're going to see the analysis of surplus produced and surplus distributed, but now inside the complex relationships of husband, wife, parents, and children. You're going to see it inside an enterprise you never thought to call an enterprise, name of the house. The goods and services are also produced in just these ways. See you next Tuesday.